So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and you may notice that things look a little bit different, and that's because I had to fiddle around with the reshade settings a bit so that I could even show this replay, because for some reason I think it's one of the weather settings with regards to reshade, where if you use that particular time of day, for some reason it makes the ground appear like it's glowing, and that effect is exacerbated very heavily when you're fighting on either sand or snow. So things are looking a little bit more drab than they do normally just because of that. And we are on the dry lake bed, of course, because the sand is the problem that was causing that, in addition to the lighting of the engine itself. So not really sure what causes that, but it has been a problem that I've had to contend with for quite some time now. So at least now I have a sort of setting where I can actually use these replays, even if it doesn't look quite as colourful as it does normally. But regardless, we do have a 4v4 field battle today, and of course this is again part of the series which is bidding goodbye to patch 0.96 as we move ever closer to patch 0.97, and this one was sent to me by DF Lister, and it is going to be a very meaty 4v4, so a field battle. And the dry lake bed is interesting because while the middle is very open, the two sides, the two armies that do tend to be on the sides do have some terrain and some rocks to contend with, and generally speaking their engagements are narrower than the ones in the middle. So it isn't just a flat field like the grassy plain, there is a little bit more to it than that, and also there is at least some terrain in terms of hills. And I believe in patch 0.97 as well, with the new terrain features that are coming out, the actual dry lake in the middle is going to consist of some muddy terrain which will actually slow units down. So we've got that to look forward to, but for the time being everything is just as is. So we'll go through the blue team first of all, as is customary, and we'll start off with Captain Gervais, who is going to be playing as Arthedain. Arthedain, of course, very much the jack of all trades when it comes to the western kingdoms of men. There isn't really any form of warfare that they can't at least contest. And they have some Arthedain marksmen on the front line, which are sort of the standard heavy archers that Arthedain can bring, or sort of more heavily armoured archers. They also have some Evendim archers, which, to be honest with you, Evendim archers are so efficient in 0.96. I'm very glad, honestly, that's one of the things that I am looking forward to about 0.97, the fact that just bringing the cheap archers is all you really need to do in 0.96 to have any sort of success at range, because you can just wear your opponents down, and more expensive archers just can't keep up the fight for as long, and nor can they really get any sort of efficiency against this sort of unit. But it is absolutely the right unit to bring in 0.96. Evendim archers very cheap, they have a bit of a shield value as well, so they're not a little bit tankier with regards to some other militia tier archers, and combined with the Arthedain marksman as well, that's going to be a lot of arrows going down range. We also have some Arthedain men-at-arms here, again unupgraded, so just the mail armour that the Arthedain units are going for here on the front. Just a sort of standard unit to hold the front line, of course, nothing too special about them with regards to their stats, but neither will they sweat when they're faced with sort of lower tier units like orcs. They should be able to fairly comfortably hold the front line there. As is customary for pretty much any Arthedain army, which probably will still be the case in 0.97 to be honest with you, because it is a very good tactic that they have, is to combine their cheap but fairly effective for what they cost Evendim spearmen alongside the Arthedain pikemen, which are a very run-of-the-mill standard line pike that you can bring and mass up in decent numbers. Also, they have the breastplate armour upgrade here, so the first level of armour upgrades that most Arthedain units have. The pikes only have one level of armour upgrade, they can't have the full plate that the men-at-arms can indulge in. But even so, the Arthedain pikemen and Evendim spearmen are a very tried and true combination, which I'd be interested to see how effective it still is. Probably more effective actually in 0.97, purely because the spears will be better against Cav, but it's not as if Cav was ever going to be charging into this combination anyway, so I'd imagine it's going to work in very much the same way. Anuminas Gate Guards, which are the higher tier pikemen as well. Obviously they are a step above the Arthedain pikemen in front of them, a big step above in fact, but they are obviously a lot more expensive. You can only really have one before the cost becomes too great to bear, but they can make a very good anchor to the centre of your line, and yeah, a very nice thing to tie together your line. Also have some Dunedain Peacekeepers, another unit which is going to change in 0.97 from a spearman to an axe infantry unit, so a more aggressive form of shielded infantry that Arthedain will be able to field, which I think is good because Arthedain already have another spearman, the Fornoster Rain Defenders, which are essentially the spear variant of the Arthedain men-at-arms. The Dunedain Peacekeepers are better than them, which is why you do see them an awful lot, but I feel as though the Axe Infantry will give Arthedain the ability to have a more aggressive infantry unit, which is good for them. Obviously it definitely plays into the fact they have options in pretty much every theatre of their roster. Doesn't really make a lot of sense, but still. Wardens of the North, armour-piercing archers, of course, very, very effective at range at sniping out, in particular heavily armoured cavalry like knights and bodyguard units, but also bodyguard units on foot can make a very good target for the Wardens of the North, and let's not forget they're also very effective when they're out of ammunition, when they have to get into melee. Dunedain Mounted Company, another Dunedain unit which is changing a bit in 0.97. They will be shifting from lancers to melee cavalry, so they will be having swords and shields rather than spears and shields. It will give Arthedain a more rounded cavalry force, and it will certainly make them one of the most well-constructed cavalry forces in the game. Not really anything they can contest there. And cavalry, Arthedain are good in Arthedain have options in pretty much every aspect of their army, as I've said, but cavalry is definitely one of the areas of their army where they can have a bit of an advantage in most cases. And this is a big part of that. The Knights of Dominus, probably the tankiest knights in the game. Big armour, big shields, obviously devastating charge, as with most knights, and there could be some hidden units as well. I would imagine there's a few units of Dunedain. Indeed, we can see the Troll Slayers hidden in the sand there. Now, for Lister's army, of course, Angmar, the player who sent me the replay, so big thank you to him. He's got some Trolls of Gundabad. As with most Angmar armies, you'd imagine them to be quite aggressive. We'll see how that works out here. He's got some Trolls, which obviously are very, very good in sustained melee. Warg Riders, which are good anti-cavalry tools, as well as they can charge into infantry, but the danger there is when their hit points are gone, their melee defense and armor are very low. So as soon as that, they have a limited shelf life on the battlefield, really. We have the Witchram Hammerguard as well, which is one of the deadliest two-handed shock troops in the game that is armor piercing. So obviously, again, alongside the likes of the Witchram and Slavers of Rudour, Girian's Paladins of Dale, and the like. Gundabad Guard are a unit which should be much more effective in 0.97 just because of the increased effectiveness of spears against cavalry. We also have some upgraded Guardians of Kharndoom, a very, very solid line infantry unit, of course. They don't do a huge amount of damage, but as line infantry you don't necessarily need them to. With their big shields and their big armour, they will hold for a lot longer than standard orcs. They bear more in common with the Uruk-hai infantry than they do with something like the Morannon infantry from Mordor, for example, which are much more numbers focused. Uruk-hai, Witch-Realm pikemen in the centre. They are similar to Uruk-hai pikemen, especially when they have the armour upgrade. They're sort of very comparable. And again, very much a symmetrical line here. So the pikes are in the middle, spears are on the flank, and then they're going to be supported by line infantry in between the two. Goblin Trackers are here, of course, again, cheap archers. You don't imagine Angmar to have a particularly good archer force, and in 0.97 they most certainly won't in comparison to a lot of other factions. Cheap archers will still do the same job in 0.97, of course. I'm not saying they're going to be made useless, but what I am saying is this skirmish force will allow Angmar to sort of quite comfortably engage with most things. They won't care about losing the Goblin Trackers, and they will just easily gobble up a lot of the ammunition from their opponents. And then, of course, we have the Barrow-wights, the 0.96 variant of the Barrow-wights, which are incredibly tanky, very slow though. So we'll see if Angmar are going to just march forward immediately, or if they're just going to wait and allow their Goblin Trackers to absorb some of that ammunition. More Warg Riders, and then of course the General's Bodyguard, the mighty Witchram Inquisitors. As far as melee knights go, they are an incredibly potent force on the field. There are going to be some more melee knights added in the upcoming patch. They're not exactly melee knights, but the Eldorlonde nobles can certainly count themselves among the sort of higher tier knight units of cavalry which are very much at home in melee. There's also the Alcarondas Faithful that Umbar are getting, so the Haven Knights and the Witchram Inquisitors will no longer have this sort of style of unit all to themselves anymore, but even so you'd imagine the Witchram Inquisitors will still be right up there amongst the most deadly cavalry units in the game. We have Swedish Walrus, who's going to be playing as Rue. He's got some Eastron clan chiefs, which are cheap spear cavalry, or cheaper spear cavalry. You could view them as being quite similar to the Gondor cavalry, actually, in the fact that they don't have shields. They maybe have less armour than the Gondorian cavalry, but I think also they're slightly cheaper, considering to get the best out of the Gondor cavalry you need to invest some money in upgrading their armour. But a decent unit of defensive cavalry that you can use, especially if you mass up a bit of cavalry. Having these in their ranks will give you an anti-cavalry bonus throughout. We also have the Eastron Guard here, which again, much like the mounted variant we just saw, a bit more focused around their cavalry bonus when compared to the units of similar tier. Limited armour value though and no shields means they're in real trouble against archers if they get focused down. Combination of Eastron Hunters and Nar Rim on the front line. The Nar Rim are probably less efficient overall than the Variag Mercenaries, especially in 0.96, because the Variag Mercenaries are a little bit more defensive, a little bit more focused around wearing the enemy down with their shields. But the Nar Rim, I believe, I can't remember whether it's slightly higher range or slightly higher damage that they have, but they are a little bit more offensively focused when compared to the Variag Mercenaries. We'll see if that pays off. The classic combination of the Golden Boys on the front line as well, the armour piercing of the Flag Rim and the Gamp Rim combined together. There's also some Scion Rim over here on the side, so some heavy spears, backed up by some Baltroth Tribesmen, a catapult as well, which in a 4v4 is actually not the worst idea, and indeed you can see back there that Imladris is deployed very far back, and Imladris usually get the best out of their army when they're aggressive, but looks like they may be forced into being aggressive if the catapult has its way. Some more Eastron Guard, some more Eastron clan chiefs, and then some Inas Rim, which is that the General's Bodyguard? I don't think it is. Curious. Well, we're seeing the Inas Rim again. We've seen the Inas Rim twice in quick succession here, and actually the Inas Rim is a unit you don't normally see because they're quite difficult to use efficiently. And then finally, the Steward of Dale. So the Steward of Dale's been in, I think, the last 4 replays I've shown, which is crazy when you think about it. And he's playing as Cardlin, which Cardlin, I feel as though the days of them being underestimated are gone. I feel as though through all of the replays that I've shown, that J-Monster has shown, that Scouts of Entertainment has shown, that I think people are starting to come around on the idea that Cardlin are a faction to be taken seriously. Yes, the morale is an issue, but they have strengths in so many other areas. They can certainly more than make up for that, and they are a very, very good Western Kingdom of Men to play as, especially if you like to keep a bit more of a tight formation. You know, they can definitely move as a unit. They need to move as a unit really to get the best out of them. And their archer force is pretty decent. The Miniscarithan archers have shields, they have good armour as well, so they're good at skirmishing down with the enemy. They can't upgrade their armour, however, like most of the other similar units from the other Western Kingdoms can. The Hearthguard of Amon Sul are of course a fantastic bodyguard unit. Spears means that cavalry is not going to want to charge into them too readily, and also they're very, very tanky, so that should keep your general safer than most other units, more Miniscarithan archers there. Cardlin going for a similar approach to Arthedain here, and again this is something which you'll probably see quite a lot of, although here, rather than going for the cheap militia spears in addition to their standard line pikes and the Wardens of Tir Gorthad in the middle, which will of course buff the morale of nearby units, very, very important, the Miniscarithan swordsman will be the unit supporting the pikes, so that will give them a little bit more punch on the front line, but unlike Arthedain it probably means that they're going to have to cut some corners in terms of cost elsewhere. But then again, you know, they do still have some pretty decent cavalry units back here. The Tharbad Riders obviously brutal charge, but not necessarily too durable in melee against other cavalry, and their morale also suffers a little bit, particularly seeing as Tharbad Riders are often going to be running around outside of any encouragement auras, which will keep them in the fight for longer. The upgraded Dunedain commanders as well, so we can see the full plate variant of the battle already at Dunedain as they are mounted. And then we have the Royal Courthouse de Rondor, which they will be getting a brand new unit model as well to set them apart from the standard units. They will be given a unit model which is going to be more similar to something like the Knights of Numinous or the Royal Courthouse Armlay, something a little bit more heavily armoured, a little bit more bodyguard-like, rather than just these Dunedain Outriders, which of course they share a unit model with both Arthedain and with their fellow Cardlin units as well. And then we have the Menotar Roman Guardians, which the Menotar Roman Guardians, of course, a fantastic dual-purpose unit, halberdiers and crossbows. Now we'll quickly go through the red team, because I can't help but notice that I'm waffling a little bit. So we have Ragnar, who's playing as Harad, and Harad, I would imagine, based on the army composition he's brought, very, very standard for 0.96. 99% of the time Harad are going to bring this sort of composition in 0.96. Cheap Haradrim spearmen, they're not going to achieve too much, but they're just here for the numbers to make sure that the rest of their army doesn't get overwhelmed. A lot of Haradrim spearmen, in fact. He hasn't actually brought the Haradrim archers by the looks of things, so he's gone for the Southron archers, which is a bit of a differentiation, but they'll still do the same sort of thing. A not overly expensive archer just to engage with the enemy. Actually, he hasn't gone for a standard Haradrim composition that I've seen, so fair play to Ragnar, I guess. So we have the Haradrim Raiders, which are a very cheap and cheerful horse archer, on a similar sort of level as the lowest tier of Rohan and Khandish horse archer. They can just poke and prod at the enemy from a distance. It's a tool that you don't really see Harad use a great deal, because horse archers tend to do their damage over a long period of time, whereas Harad, most of their army and most of the time you'll see people play Harad trying to do as much damage as quickly as possible, as much damage as they can, as quickly as they possibly can. Serpent Guard and the Black Serpents, so obviously again we have a full complement of lancers here, potentially very damaging. And it is also against Cardlin, so it's not as if they're going to have to deal with a huge amount of melee cavalry directly, although if Rune come to the raid, there will be quite a lot of spears they need to deal with. A lot of javelins as well, big part of Harad, Muhad, Beast Hunters and the Demons of the Desert, but of course way back here, in reserve, hoping to use them in the late game to swing the tide of the battle, Ragnar has brought the Mumakil, which obviously the Mumakil, the most iconic unit in the Harad roster, a real powerhouse of a unit, but risky because of how expensive they are. Then we have, I'm just going to call him Sher, because that is a very interesting name. I can't pronounce that. Anyway, we have Imladris, so we have the Eldar 8 Tower on the front, a unit which I'm not really the biggest fan of, because they never seem to perform as well as you would expect them to, considering their elven lineage. But they are going to be backed up by the Eldar Enway Harry Patala, of course a fantastic heavy elven spearman. Infantry is something that the Imladris elves certainly don't hurt for. Brought a couple of units of archers as well, so some Noratino warriors, some Eldar Enway Harry Quinga. There's nothing wrong with a token archer forces Imladris, but it does look as though most of his money, quite rightly, has gone into his infantry and his cavalry. Imladris Blade Masters and Harry Maciel as well, Harry Maciel. So obviously heavy elven swordsmen of varying quality, but overall they're still going to have far more quality than most of what Rune is going to be able to offer today. And then the Gwaithie Arthand, which of course are a really, really durable spear. This probably typifies the spear unit best, because they don't tend to get kills very quickly, but they are so difficult to bring down, the Gwaithie Arthand. Once upon a time, the Falas Lords, which was their old name, they used to have 4 hit points, which made them nigh on impossible to kill. The Imladris Riders are here. They do not have the armour upgrade, but of course there's more horse archers. They don't want to get too close to the runic skirmish line, otherwise they will be focused down. Horse archers, of course, can be zoned out by foot archers relatively easily because of their lower numbers. We'll see how well they can be used, but they would be very useful against those runic spear cavalry. Eldraenway Herimire, of course, fantastic lancers, and also some Imladris Sentinels, so no Gwythi Rockdoor, which is an interesting move, but overall still very much the same sort of cavalry and infantry combination that Imladris has. However, Imladris deploying that far back on the hill has left his ally Baconfish here out in the cold a little bit, because Umbar, they do run the risk of actually being crumpled in on the side from Rune's cavalry as well as from the front against Angmar, but Umbar are pretty resilient. We'll see if they're going to be able to keep up with the assault here. Angmar, of course, very, very aggressive. Belagair archers on the front line, which of course are another philosophy of just being not overly expensive but very, very tanky, as 0.96 really, really encourages. The Goblin Trackers and the Belagair archers will kind of cancel one another out. It'll be, a sort of a useless fight in many ways, and then it will come down to infantry, so we'll see if Umbar's infantry force is going to be able to hold up. Combination of Corsair infantry, which Umbar will be holding on to in the upcoming patch, but they will be losing most of their Corsair units. I believe the infantry, the Blackguards and the crossbows are the only Corsair units they're keeping. The standard Corsairs, the pikes and the savages are being lost in favour of other things. For one, obviously the Alcarondas Faithful, which is a big addition, a really, really strong unit of melee knights. But they do have the Corsair Pikemen here, so this might be the last time we see the Corsair Pikemen in action, and they're going to be making up a relatively cheap front line, but very, very numerous. Mercenary Cavalry, this sort of melee cavalry is usually so efficient, but wargs will rip through them, so they're going to need to be very careful. There is a catapult here, but I don't think Angmar are going to need any invitation to charge forward when they see the formation of the red team. We shall see. Harbingers of Castamere, as well as a lot of Castamere's Legion. This is where all the quality from Umbar's army is going to come from. It's also where they're going to need to win the battle, I think, because that's a lot of Angmar forces that are going to be barrelling down on them. As good as the Castamere's Legion are, it's a lot of Barrow Wights and a lot of Guardians of Khan Doom, a lot of Pikes, and there's also the Hammer Guard to cut their way through as well. It's going to be difficult. They're going to need support here, I think, Umbar, and the Númenórean Lancers. As if that wasn't enough, their allies, their other flankers also deployed a little bit further behind, although I think this is in an attempt to try and use a bit more of a choke point. We have Gondor, played by Crippa Slayer, and he has got some Gondor archers and some Karandros Marksmen. Karandros Marksmen are a pretty good example of an expensive archer which doesn't really pay for itself too easily in 0.96 because of how expensive they are. They are significantly stronger in 0.97, this kind of unit, but they still should be pretty good because the Karandros Marksmen do pull out a two-handed sword in melee, which obviously makes them a bit more of a risky proposition to try and close down and engage in melee. Arthedain and Gondor pretty similar in the way that they set themselves out. Gondor are a little bit more defensive focused, however, whereas Arthedain can be a little bit more aggressive with their better cavalry. That's the main difference between the two. Gondor's got a more extensive archer line as well, and is a little bit more focused around their spears and pikes, the Guards of Osgiliath being one such unit, but also the mighty Fountain Guard. I mean, this is one area in which Gondor certainly has the edge over Arthedain. Arthedain's got nothing like the Fountain Guard, so it can go toe-to-toe with them. We also have the Gondor infantry unupgraded back here, but they're just here, I suppose, to support the line and support the more heavily armoured spears they've got in front of them. Pelagia Marines or Pelagria Marines, probably going to be super important to Gondor here to try and really whittle away at the extensive Arthedain pikes. They might even need to go over and support Umbar as well. We have the Trebuchet, which is already firing actually at Arthedain, although their position means they're probably going to hit the cliff. And then some token cavalry from Gondor as well. The Pinnith Galen cavalry are good lancers, all things considered, but traditionally it's a unit which is quite risky to bring against Arthedain because Arthedain's got all the answers against Gondor when it comes to their cavalry. But the armies that are closest together are over here, Harad and Cardland, so without further ado, let's begin. And already in range of the Haradrim Spearmen, the Miniscarithan archers are going to start firing. It'd be interesting to see if they keep firing though, because it is after all only the Haradrim Spearmen that are in range. The Haradrim Raiders are coming forward, but the Haradrim Raiders really don't want to just go right into the front of the Cardland forces. They're just going to get butchered by the archer line. They would honestly be best off just allowing this first layer of Haradrim Spearmen to absorb a lot of the Cardland ammunition. Because to be brutally honest, if Harad no longer need to worry about archers dealing with their javelins, Harad could find themselves in a very good place indeed, especially when you consider the power of their Mumakil is also going to be a factor later on in the battle. The Haradrim Raiders, however, I think realising their mistake at this point, are probably going to retreat back behind their spears. You know, the archers are just going to make mincemeat of them. I think they're going to try and get into shooting circle, but shooting circle here is not really going to save them too much. Like they're right in the firing line here of the Cardland forces. They might be trying to go after the cavalry and the pikes, which again is not the worst idea necessarily. But for me, it's just a bit of a waste of a horse archer unit, really. I mean, you've got the Southron archers for a reason. Like the horse archers could be best used to try and support Imladris to really go after the cheaper and more fragile cavalry units. Meanwhile, already charging forward, the Corsair Blackguards have been uncovered by the aggressive Dunedain Mounted Company, which could be viewed as a good thing, but based on how quickly they are dying off and wavering, I would assume the Corsair Blackguards managed to get a volley off. Forward come the Knights of Illuminus as well. There's also javelin support coming in from back there as well, so 2 units of Blackguards. This is a bad place for the Arthedain cavalry to be, honestly. I mean, seeing a bit of a gap, that's all well and good, but you've got to remember that the possibility of hidden units being there is a bit of a crippling factor here, honestly, because the Corsair Blackguards, exactly the sort of thing you want ploughing into the Knights of Illuminus. The Knights of Illuminus are usually such a durable unit which you see fight for the whole battle long, but a unit of really quality javelins like this are going to be able to burn them down really quickly, and the Knights of Illuminus already looking very, very battered and bruised. The Warg's coming over to try and help his ally, but it's already a bit late here. The Grey Company and the Dunedain Rangers are up on the hill. That body piercing, I think they're trying to shoot right down the densely packed Umbar front line, which is not a bad idea, but they've also put themselves right on the hilltop here, and that's really inviting Gondor and Umbar to shoot them down. Gondor in particular, they're going to have to pick up the slack here, you'd imagine, just because it doesn't look as though Umbar have gone for quite so many archers. They've gone for just 2 Balagire archers. You know, Angmar trying to pressure the front line, but I mean, they have been very aggressive here with their cavalry, the blue team, which is to their credit. I mean, certainly over here, considering the huge gap between Umbar and Imladris, I would say that's definitely the right thing to do, because Umbar already, they committed a lot of resources to try and stop the very aggressive push of Arthedain, which they were successful at. But now Lister has managed to find a gap with his Inquisitors and with his Warg Riders. The catapult is right in view. The Balagire archers are close. This is the Corsair Blackguard shifting themselves over as well. I mean, the Corsair Blackguards, they need to be careful here with their Magmar, because they can scarcely afford to lose another Knight unit so quickly as they already have done. Still, we also have some units here in the backfield. We can see some Eastron clan chiefs, which are being chased off by the Imladris riders. Like, again, horse archers are going to be a real problem for a unit like this. Relatively lightly armoured, no shield. It's going to be a problem for them. So Imladris doing the right thing there by trying to zone out the runic cavalry, charging in the Witch Realm Inquisitors. Honestly, the catapult might not be the worst loss in many ways for Umbar, just because if Angmar really wants to be aggressive, the catapult's going to be of limited use anyway. But they could potentially make this worthwhile by utilising those javelins to kill off those Witch Realm Inquisitors, which could be a huge, huge gain for them. Eastron clan chiefs charging in as well, but it's a bit of a mess over here at this point, which may suit Angmar in particular as the battle goes on. Meanwhile, Gondor infantry marching forward to try and plug the gap, but I'm not really sure why he's sending forward just a unit of standard infantry. A unit of spears would have been much better, because of course Arthedain is just going to come forward with some lance cavalry. Not the best charge, to be fair. The Gondor infantry really just blocking Arthedain's advance with their cav. But you can see over here, I imagine that over here it's going to turn in to just a bit of a skirmish slog between 2 banks of archers. And Gondor did bring more archers, so ultimately, while they may have spent more on them, which in 0.96 is not necessarily a good thing, just by virtue of them having more archers, they should probably win this. Also, the fact they've got so many spears and fountain guard, well, pikes I should say, and fountain guard, they should be able to hold the choke point, which means Arthedain is probably going to want to come over here and maybe join up with Angmar to try and assault Umbar. That's probably going to be how they try and deal with this. This unit of Gondor infantry, this single unit of Gondor infantry, is still just pushing forward. I mean, there's not many knights left. This might be enough to finish off the Knights of Illuminus, to be honest with you. You can see over here as well that a single unit of Corsair infantry charging forward to try and stop the Banderbrass archers from firing, but the Wargs are here, so this unit of very basic Corsair infantry is going to rout very, very quickly in the face of the Wargs. Meanwhile, over here, it's almost like 2 little 2v2s that have sprung up, with Rune offering a little bit of support to the other side. Rune starting to open up on the Imladris front line, and Imladris with their composition, I mean, they've come forward here with the Elder Runway Hero Hatal, which, I mean, to be fair, they are very resilient to archers from the front. They've got very good armour and also very good shields, but this isn't necessarily what you want to be doing as Imladris. Like, while they can absorb more arrows than the other elven factions, they still suffer from the same problem the elves have of having lower numbers in their army. They can't really afford... Every unit model lost is a tragedy for the elves. And actually, if Rune was wise, he would actually focus down the Eldar Etar, because those 3 units of archers Rune has would rip through this unit very, very quickly. They may not be the most effective unit in the Imladris roster, but it would be easy and cheap kills to pick up. With Imladris' army, they really needed to be more aggressive than they're currently being, especially seeing as Rune and now Cardlan are cycling off their cavalry down to the other side. This is the green light that the red team has to charge forward and try and swallow Rune and Cardlan whole, because if they just sit back, then the cavalry that's been sent over to support the other side is going to be a real problem for Umbar and Gondor in the long run, and Harad and Imladris are going to make no gains in the meantime. So that is the problem. We'll see what Harad and Imladris do. I mean, Harad and Imladris are traditionally both very aggressive factions, but they haven't really sort of lived up to that billing so far. We'll see if that changes anytime soon. Meanwhile, the Witch Realm Inquisitors riding with their wargs. The wargs actually shaken. Castamir's legion certainly not proving to be easy prey for the wargs at all. A very solid and professional infantry unit indeed. The Harbingers of Castamir are over here as well. A lower unit count for them though, and I think they have lost a few unit models as well, which suggests that they got charged. Meanwhile, interesting engagement here. The Corsair pikemen have actually come forwards to engage the Barrow-wights, keeping them away from their main line a little bit longer. Not sure if I agree with that. You need to burn down the Barrow-wights quickly. If you allow them to get involved in this sort of layer warfare, where they're allowed to slowly knock through each layer at a time, that's exactly what the Barrow-wights want. Killing the Barrow-wights quickly is not the easiest thing, but cavalry can do it, crossbows and javelins can do it, all things that Umbar does have access to. The Númenórean Lancers being one such unit, but there are trolls over here, that's the last place they want to be. Some Gondorians coming over to support the Umbar front line. Very unlikely alliance indeed between Umbar and Gondor. Meanwhile, what have we got over here? Some Evendim spearmen cresting the hill, so obviously this single unit of Gondor infantry. I'm not sure what happened to them, whether they broke or whether they were just outright killed. They are obviously going to try and crest over the hill, and they are going to try and join, I think, for the most part, join in with their ally Angmar in taking down Umbar. Which again, if seeing where Umbar was, Gondor needs to support them a little bit more than they're currently doing. Gondor's sitting back a little bit too much for my taste, but part of that blame also needs to be given to the Umbar player as well, because Umbar, seeing the situation of Imladris being way back and really far away from them, Gondor being a little bit further back as well, Umbar then probably needed to shift their army backwards a little bit. Because there's no guarantee that your allies are going to be able to help you. If they can, they of course need to, but if they're unable to, then you know, you're making a rod for your own back by charging in aggressively, especially against a faction like Angmar, which, with their brute strength, you really need to be investing heavily in your infantry to be able to withstand this sort of assault. And I'm not sure whether Corsair pikemen and infantry, cheap as they may be, and numerous as they may be, I'm not sure whether that's going to be the answer here. The Barrow-wights, in combination with the Witch Realm pikemen and Guardians of Khan Dûm, is going to be tough for them. We do have some Gundabad Guard heading around the flank. They're engaging some Corsair Blackguards in melee, which is another great thing for Angmar. They may already be shaken, but they're stopping these javelins from firing, which are one of the more potent tools that Umbar has available to them at this point. Dunedain commanders charging in, deciding to change their mind and trying to chase down the Imladris horse archers. What happened to the rest of the Imladris cavalry, by the way? Some Tharbad riders over there. The rest of the Imladris cavalry is MIA. What happened to the Heru Myro? Ah, here they are. The Heru Myro are in a fight they really don't want to be in. They're up against the Warg Riders and what's left of the Witch Realm Inquisitors. Terrible fight for them. I mean, they will at least stand up better than other Lancers, but it's still not a fight they should win. I mean, the Witch Realm Inquisitors, even as depleted as they are, the ultimate cavalry killers, and the Witch Realm Inquisitors have already done some good things in this battle, whereas the Heru Myro have done very little. I can't see the Imladris sentries anymore, which is a worrying thing for Imladris. They may already have been killed. Meanwhile, Harbingers of Castamir surrounding the Gundabad Guard. They will eventually be killed, but some Snaga Stalkers also helping to wrap up the Umbar front line. Umbar are struggling here. Castamir's Legion coming forwards, but there's just so many Angmar orcs just flooding over the line, which you know what you're going to get from Angmar. The level of aggression they invest in is somewhat variable, but you always know that when they come forward, they commit. There's going to be a lot of power on that front line. There goes Castamir, falling to Snaga of all things. How embarrassing for him. Meanwhile, Gondor have pushed through. They've actually been the aggressor on this choke point here, which is confusing for me, to be honest with you. I mean, Umbar are getting shredded on the other side, and Gondor are committed to a fight which is pretty bad for them, to be honest with you. I think this is exactly what Arthedain would have wanted. Arthedain have got more in the way of infantry that they can use to just overwhelm Gondor as they come through this choke point. And they also have quality as well. They've got a lot of Dunedain units. So it's not as if Gondor can just rely on the Fountain Guard to cut their way out of this. There is a lot of Fountain Guard and pikes, and also the shielded variant of the Fountain Guard, the Nimlothian Honour Guard. I mean, the Fountain Guard, they are pushing fairly far forward into the Arthedain line, but Arthedain have sent forward some support to their ally to try and take on Umbar as well, so we'll see how well this goes. The Trebuchet is still firing away. There's not really anything in terms of cavalry that's gone after it yet, although the Dunedain Mounted Company will probably change all that. They're making a beeline for it right now. There's some Fountain Guard over here, the Ebendim Spearmen, but I think Umbar are the ones which are really struggling so far. Now though, as we head over to here, I think we are now getting a bit of a melee engagement between Rune and Imladris. This probably should have happened a little bit sooner from an Imladris perspective. The Gamprim are going to be an interesting one because Imladris don't have their own pikes to really counteract them. But if it comes down to a close quarters melee fight, you would always back Rune, but I feel as though here Rune have found some gaps and they're utilising their lancers to really good effect. And the Heru Makeel, who, you know, their kryptonite is cavalry. You know, they are so good at fighting other infantry and melee. Elven heavy swordsmen, they really do rule the roost in terms of Elven heavy swordsmen outside of the bodyguard units like the Noldorin Blade Masters, and you could count the Arithalion Inanwaith in there as well, but a good cavalry charge, because they're not multiple HP, a good cavalry charge will really knock them on their ass. And that is what's happening so far. The Runic force is also using their catapult at close range, although they hit their own men there, which is not great for them. Harad also, you know, the aggressors over here being Cardland moving forward, I think seeing the fact that they needed to move up to sort of bring parity with their line, not wanting to suffer the same fate that Umbar's suffering on the other side. Cardland moving forward to really bring up the front line alongside their Runic allies. And the problem Harad are really going to have in this engagement is that they just don't have the quality on the front line. They were always going to be really, really reliant on their lancers, which are still not doing much of anything really. At this point, you know, their line is falling apart. They need their lancers to do something. They're trying to use their javelins. They had the Hashari as well, and the Mumakil, so they were always going to be super reliant on their javelins. That was a huge volley though. Those bandits got ripped apart by the Demons of the Desert, but it is only bandits and Minas Garithan swordsmen, so I mean Cardland probably won't be too worried about that, to be honest. There was still a huge amount of casualties they took in just a single volley. Demons of the Desert flexing their muscles once again, but Harad need to do something here. Their front line just got absolutely run over by Cardland there, because it was made up just of Haradrim spearmen and Southron archers. A really weak front line really. And the purpose behind doing that is utilising the really damaging javelins and the lance cavalry that they have brought Harad. They're committing their lancers forward now, which, I mean, to be fair, Harad and Cardland, I should say, are leading the way with their Minas Garithan archers and swordsmen, so the lancers should be able to get a decent amount of casualties done there. I mean, they are technically, Cardland maybe being a bit over-aggressive at this point, interestingly enough, but I guess that they feel that they can do that purely because their Runic allies are also having the best of this engagement as well. Imladris, as strong as their infantry is, if you don't support their advance, you know, if you allow them to, just like anyone else, a hammer and anvil strike on an Imladris front line can be really devastating. Inas Rim fighting their last against the Gwaith Arthand, but the Imladris army as a whole maybe not doing it too well at this point. Meanwhile, Angmar still doing very well against Umbar. In fact, it looks as though Umbar are all but defeated at this point. So the blue team definitely doing a good job. I mean, Cardland is starting to suffer at the hands of Harad, as we saw on the other side. If those lances had been used maybe a little bit earlier, before their front line completely collapsed, maybe things could have been even better for them. As it is, though, Umbar are pretty much gone. It'd be interesting to see where Angmar goes next, whether they support their allies in Arthedain over here, because Arthedain, it did look as though they were actually having a few issues against the Gondorians. Having said that, very little left at this point of both Arnor and Gondor. Arthedain I should say. Both factions really fighting one another to a standstill. It looks as though Arthedain are going to have just the better of this engagement, which is really bad news for the red team. They really need some sort of victory somewhere. Nimlothian Honour Guard at this point, fighting their last as well. The Warns of the North and the rest of the Dunedain just overwhelming them. There's a few pikes left as well. Everdim Archers fighting against the one unit of Fountain Guard that remains. There goes one of the generals. That could be the Haradrim general, by the looks of things. But yeah, it looks as though Angmar are going to come over here and just help to crush Gondor before moving over to the other side. It may be that the other side actually doesn't need any sort of help. I mean, we'll see. Rune are still sort of slowly mulching their way through Imladris. Imladris will, of course, fight for a long time. The Gwaith Arthand, very difficult to bring down. So, at the very least, Rune will be occupied with Imladris' remnants for some time, which might give Harad the opening they need. Well, that's maybe not the best idea, charging headlong into pikes. See what the Black Serpents can do. The Demons of the Desert also moving forward. There's still the Hashari Shadows, but I mean, I really don't see a way that the red team can get back into this at this point. I think the damage was done fairly early on. Umbar sticking out too far ahead of their allies, which is something you always need to watch out for. I fell victim to that in one of the .97 battles we actually played. You know, I brought quite an aggressive Gondorian army based very heavily around my infantry, but my allies were positioned a little bit further back than I was. I charged forward, engaged Mordor head on, and Mordor got some support from his allies' cavalry as well in finishing me off, but I was, you know, there was much less support forthcoming for me, and that was technically my own fault for being too aggressive for my own good. Because I probably would have lost 1v1 against Mordor anyway. The other cavalry just sort of hastened my demise. But again, there is two sides to that. You know, it was mostly my fault, I would suggest, for being too aggressive, which Umbar, you could say that was their folly as well. They moved forward with their units to engage the Barrow-wights rather than pulling back to sort of bring themselves more into line with their Gondorian allies. Having said that, there is also the case for saying that both in this battle and the battle that I'm sort of comparing this to, that, you know, the allies to the player that was being overwhelmed could have been a little bit more forthcoming with some support. You know, because ultimately, if you don't support them, there's going to be problems later on in the battle because you're going to find yourself outnumbered. You can come back from it, of course, as one of the Mumakil falls, but you're making it more difficult for yourself by leaving your ally, sort of hanging them out to dry, as it were. That was a very, very accurate hit there from the runic catapult, sniping out the Imladris general there. The Mumakil need to keep moving, to be honest with you. The Serpent Guard coming in here, charging into the Warns of Tingorth and actually breaking them, not many of them left. Hearthguard of Amon Sul breaking as well, so Serpent Guard, this horde of Haradrim which are just sort of roaming around the battlefield at this point. Manatar, Roman Guardians are gone as well, so Harad have beaten Cardolan. But all of the other fights, Arthedain narrowly beating Gondor, Angmar beating Umbar relatively comfortably in the end, and also Rune having a very solid victory against Imladris here as well in the middle. Honestly, at this point, the catapult should probably be switching its attention to the Mumakil, get that flaming ammunition going, because if you do hit Mumakil with flaming ammunition from Siege, it makes them run amok immediately. Of course, it's a bit of a risk to do that if you're using your artillery to try and snipe Mumakil out. There's no guarantee you'll be able to hit them, but still. A ballista is much better at that than a catapult, and you can see here they're charging in, but there's Gamprim all over the place. The Mumakil at this point are routing and broken. And with that goes if there was any hope, the very last hope that the red team are going to be able to win this. We'll see how well Harad can do. I mean, maybe Harad can finish off Rune as well. That would be a bit of a feather in Ragnar's cap if he was able to kill off two factions. Muhad Beast Hunters coming in here to engage the Scion Rim. There are the Demons of the Desert. They're about to unleash a whole world of hurt onto the Golden Boys, as there you can see right through the units there, and obviously devastating shots from the Demons of the Desert. Such a powerful unit. But at this point, we can see that Angmar are also on the way over here. Some routing Angmar force, Imladris forces as well. Goblin trackers starting to fire away. I mean, Angmar don't have too much left of their army, to be fair. So Umbar did give as good as they got, I suppose. But in the end, you know, the battle was only ever going in one way. I mean, it may have ended closer than it started, but there was never a moment where I thought Umbar were going to gain the upper hand in that engagement. Meanwhile, Eastron Guard coming over here. The Hashari Shadows charging in. I mean, the Eastron Hunters are a soft target as well, so they'll be able to kill off a few more of them. So certainly for the red team, we can say that the MVP was Harad, purely because they were able to win against the opponent that was directly opposite them, and they're going to be able to get some kills on Rune as well. Although with nothing but Lancers left, really, you know, they're going to have to charge into the Gamprim, which when they're this low on numbers, it's forgivable, just because you can try and break them. The Shari Shadows routing off though the Eastron Guard. Again, this is where their anti-cavalry bonus will really come home to roost, causing the Hashari Shadows to rout. Demons of the Desert looks as though they're out of ammunition as well, because they're just going to be committed to melee. They're a very solid melee combatant as well, actually. I think they count as two-handed spears, so in melee they're absolutely lethal to cavalry. They're also multiple HP, of course, but, you know, in comparison to something like the Champions of Nathrat or the Trollmen, they do lack a little bit. But even so, makeshift Trollmen, as they were, they're going to fight on the front line, but you can see here the Angmar Orcs closing in. The old Angmar squeeze. There goes the Angmar General, though, actually run through by one of the Haradrim's Lancers. What was that too? Over here, Witchram Inquisitors were very, very depleted, but of course, you know, they've had a good battle as well, getting in behind the Umbar front line, as well as then dealing with the Elder Enway Harry Myro, so the Witch King can afford to be pretty pleased with his performance today. There's the Haradrim General, the Black Serpents. Still 13 of them left. The Black Serpents are not the easiest cavalry unit to take down, but you would imagine there go the Dunedain Mounted Company retreating. Still a couple of Inquisitors left alive. I mean, there's just too much, including pikes, left for a single unit of multiple HP Lancers to really turn the battle around. The dying embers of this fight, the Demons of the Desert still fighting on the front line, utilising their rather savage-looking weaponry. Almost like two shark-toothed swords that have been lashed together. The Darth Mauls of the Lord of the Rings world. Serpent Guard also charging, trying to deal with what's left of the enemy mounted units. I have to say, the new units mods for the Serpent Guard are one of the really nice additions that Harad are getting in the upcoming patch. Very, very nice indeed. The darker look for the Black Serpents as well, I'm a big fan. Close range catapult hit, which did actually hit a lot of those Serpent Guards. That Runic Catapult's been very good at hitting sort of cavalry targets in this battle, ironically enough, which is usually the sort of thing you really don't want to bother with your artillery, because there's very little chance of actually hitting them, and it actually routed them as well. Brutal. What's going on over here? The Grey Company. Still that routing Mumakil. He's running amok. There's over here as well the Grey Company, trying to deal with what's left of the Serpent Guard, and based on numbers, they're going to win that fight as well. There's Strider facing off against the Cruel Haradrim, killing off another Serpent Guard. So yeah, the Grey Company should win that fight just because they outnumber the Serpent Guard so much, and the Serpent Guard are also already shaken. Demons of the Desert fighting to the last, padding the Harad players' kill count just a little bit more. But ultimately, this fight is going to end. But a close battle for a 4v4, honestly. It is close, based on what I've been saying. I mean, this fight is closer than perhaps I've given it credit for with my wording, and it has been a good fight. But ultimately, you know, in 3 of the 4 main engagements that were happening, the blue team were never really in danger of losing them. So even though they won them by relatively narrow margins in the end, that was always going to be what made the difference. Credit to Harad, though, for killing Cardlan, although I think Cardlan's sort of kamikaze charge into the Serpent Guard and the Mumakil and the Demons of the Desert kind of helped them out a little bit there. If Cardlan had been maybe a little bit more patient, they could have had a better time of that, but still, got to give credit where credit is due. Harad did well in those terms. Meanwhile, the Hashari Shadows came back from routing, so both the units of mounted rangers facing off against one another, the Hashari and the Grey Company, 2 potentially extremely lethal tools that both these factions have available to them. Also some Imladris Riders coming over there, routing, seeing their allies fighting and just going, nah, you're on your own, goodbye. I think that's the only unit that's left as well. I think the Demons of the Desert have been killed off, so yes indeed. Last stand is going to be made by the Hashari Shadows, and the Grey Company biting off a little bit more than they can chew. Hashari Shadows in double their number. The Runic Catapult again trying to snipe out some of the enemy cavalry, not using Flaming Shot for a more aggressive hit, but even so at this distance a catapult is still not going to be as pinpoint accurate as a ballista would be. A good fight though. Have to thank Lister for sending this one to me. This may be the last time, obviously again, last time we see the Corsair Pikemen in the game, and also maybe the last time in 0.96 that we see the Dry Lake Bed, which is one of the more popular sort of field battle locations, because again it's not as dull as the grassy plain, but it does still offer a relatively even playing field for all the players involved. One of these, some routing Haradrim Spearmen. So Strider has died, 12 Hashari Shadows left. What are they fighting up against? 1 Dunedain Mounted Company? Okay lads, it's time for the Hashari Shadows to charge in. Glorious last samurai style. There's still 1 Grey Company they need to shank first, and there they go. Are they going to rout? Some Witchram Inquisitors over there. I would imagine they're probably going to rout. Actually, yeah, they're already shaken. I mean, the Witchram Inquisitors terrify other cavalry in melee, and rightly so. Even with only 3 of them, I mean, these are Hashari Shadows after all. Their main purpose is shooting enemies at range. Yeah, they routed. And there we go. That is going to be the end of this battle. I've noticed actually the announcer hasn't said anything in this battle, which is rather odd. Not that I'm complaining too much about that, but yeah, a good victory here for the blue team. I think really, you know, Arthedain and Angmar did very well over on their side. You know, it is worth saying as well that Umbar and Gondor together had a decent number of troops deployed. But I do feel as though what really, it was the jagged formation of the red team overall. Some of them were deployed too far back, some of them were deployed too far forward. You need to have more of a plan. I've learnt this, the hard way in the past, that if you're on a team battle, which 0.97 is even more developed in this way to be more focused around these team battles, you need to coordinate with your team well. Otherwise, you're going to be in real trouble. Like, it's not a 4v4 is not 4 separate 1v1s. You can mix and match your compositions, and again, the blue team just did that better. As with most of these team battles, the team that works together better is going to be the team that wins, and so it has proven to be here. So very well played by the blue team, and I will see what did the most damage for the player who sent me the replay list of what was his MVP. 165 on the Witch Ram Inquisitors, which I would agree with that. Angmar were able to get in behind to do some hammer and anvil strikes on Umbar. Early on, it looked as though that cavalry engagement was going to go very badly after the Corsair Blackguard savaged the initial assault from the Arthedain Cav. But ultimately, from the other side, with some support from Rune, the other Angmar cavalry units were able to really do the business. Witch Realm Inquisitors were also able to kill off some of those Imladris cavalrymen as well, which obviously Imladris' cavalry is so important to kill because it's so good. 157 units kills on the Guardians of Kharndoom. The main line for Angmar did very well because, again, a lot of the Umbar front line was made up of Corsairs, so you'd expect these sort of numbers from units like Guardians of Kharndoom. One of these units of Gundabad Guard got absolutely dumpstered by the Harbingers of Castamere and some Blackguard. Hammer Guard did okay, but again, it wasn't really deployed until later on, as is customary for a unit of that tier. And the Barrow-wights, of course, main purpose is holding the line, but with how long they stay alive, they also tend to ratchet up some kills as well. So yeah, very well played to all factions involved. There wasn't really any sort of really glaringly obviously bad play here. It was just the fact that the blue team worked better in tandem than the red team here. So yeah, very good fight. Thank you to Lister. I do not know what's next. Might be that the Moria Siege comes next, because I was kind of planning on the Moria Siege being what I ended my 0.96 coverage on, so I'm not sure. Regardless, there will still be a couple more 0.96 battles upcoming as well. There may be sort of another 1 or 2 0.97 previews as well before it actually releases. We shall see. But regardless, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.